So, as a child, did you understand what God was? Did you learn it in school that this is what the heathens?
Well,
they
God
sort of
didn't
used to?
exist, and it was only and it was out of the question for any. It was considered to be like so atavistic and so ignorant. And so, children and young people and ordinary like Soviet citizens could not believe in God. You could end up in very big trouble. For you would get kicked out of young pioneers or Komsomol. It was just out of the question. It was like, just the same as in 1960s or 70s America, is just to say I'm running for president and I'm a communist.
Right.
So it was completely out of the question. So it was reserved only for some degree of leeway was reserved in that respect for very backwards, ignorant people, such as very old people and very old women, and women specifically because essentially all the old people were women. Men died much younger, and that was the whole generation prior to mine, 2 generations. That was essentially where most men of eligible age had been killed.
Right.
During the World War II, and and in any event, men has always and continue to die much younger than women because of the stuff that they drink, so and other kinds of things. But that, and importantly, so basically, when you talk about very old people, there's just great preponderance of old women. And so for them, yes, it would be kind of, and people would just kind of, yeah, it's understandable. She believes in ghosts or something like that, She believes in...
So let's just humor her, kind of. We'll humor her.
Not humor, but it's just kind of leave them alone, okay? Even though you have to, if you can, you have to convince them also. For instance, the first orbital space flight, April 12, 1961, by Yuri Gagarin, right? 108 minutes and one full orb, like circle around the Earth. That was a big argument afterwards. Well, Gagarin didn't see anybody up there. Where is he, your God? I mean, Gagarin didn't see him, and he was all the way up there. So where is he? So, and that was considered like an important and big argument. But of course, and my live-in nanny that kind of left us when I was maybe 3 or 4, but I loved her very much. She was basically a peasant girl from the Volga region, living in Leningrad, as I understand, without proper documentation. You had to have a stamp of registration. And so she lived with us, and my parents gave her food and shelter, and she just took care of us, of me specifically. After my brother was born, I don't think she could handle the 2 of us and in our small, basically, room for 5 people.
Right.
So she left. But I remember being like, when my parents left for work, and my little brother was in this pre-kindergarten or wasn't even born yet. I remember, yes, how she would feed me, and I would just and I remember that she had an image of God's mother. That's how she explained it to me, like rolled up and hidden under her roll-out mattress on the floor. And she. And it was just a Madonna Russian style icon, basically, and I knew that I couldn't say anything to anyone, because then she would be in great trouble, serious trouble. What would that mean? That she probably would be dismissed by my parents, because they would consider this is completely unacceptable, that is putting such thoughts and notions in my head. And
but your parents would have reacted that way?
Well, they probably would have a very serious conversation with her, because if I had blabbered it out somewhere else to somebody else, even outside of our room in the apartment, in the communal apartment, there would be trouble. A young person was not supposed to believe in God. That was not acceptable. But she did. She was illiterate. She was coming. She came from and I knew somehow at that age 3 or however 4 that I had a bargaining chip with her. That basically I could blackmail her. I had power over her because I could say a word that she believes in God, and she has this image there which I had no idea what it was anyways. And she would be in trouble. But of course, I didn't do anything. But yeah, there was God did not exist, and the churches were not open. Of course, there were no. There probably were some circles of religious study, but I was not, obviously, in my childhood aware of that at all. Nobody believed in God. And so, therefore, there was no afterlife. There was no heaven or hell. But somehow it felt that it's like almost didn't matter because Soviet people would live under communism, and that essentially communism was not clear what it was, but it was paradise. And even if we were not privy to live in, just fortunate to live in, my parents' generation or older generations, they would not live under communism just for sheer time considerations. But when I first went to elementary school, very vividly, I remember this red cloth slogan in the cafeteria, saying that the party solemnly promises that the new generation of Soviet people will live under communism, and that was it was. In other words, we were supposed to enter the era of communism by 1980. And that was from Nikita Khrushchev, the Soviet leader after Stalin, from his speech in 1960, I think, to the party Congress. The party solemnly proclaims, party means Communist Party, that the new generation of Soviet people would live under communism. But when you're 7 or 8 or 9, it's so far away that it doesn't really matter. Okay, but it was completely yes. Oh, sure, we will live under communism. What does it mean that under communism you wouldn't have to work unless you wanted to, but you would have evolved by that time to the extent that you actually would want to. And you wouldn't be paid because money would have no meaning. You would just take whatever you needed. What if I needed more than I needed? Well, by that time, we would only enter communist era when everybody, Soviet people, will have become completely prepared to be, just in other words, we were supposed to be angels, and that was supposed to be paradise, So you take all the food you need, everything is free, otherwise you work if you want to work, and you want to work because, everybody wants to do something, you just want to. It was not clear at all what communism would be.
Do you think the teachers were sometimes just sort of making it up as they went along? I mean,
well, there was no clear definition ever. Nobody ever actually discussed that, what it would be like. But basically, it was just entering heaven, essentially, kingdom of God.
Right.
Party solemnly proclaims that the new generation of Soviet people will enter the kingdom of God. That's basically.
Do you remember a time that you and your friends would sort of ask those challenging questions? Well,
there were no challenging questions. I don't think we ever doubted any of that. It was not something that we ever discussed because there was no room for doubt. Nobody ever said anything against that. Just when you live in a very isolated kind of world, and that is all you hear, you don't develop any room for doubt because you just don't know that any other interpretation can actually exist.
Yeah.
So it was also, we were told that endlessly, that of course we were infinitely lucky to have been born in the Soviet Union, and we felt lucky to have been born in the Soviet Union because everywhere else in the world, life was horrible. And we were genuinely sorry for poor people like in Amerika, for instance, or, anywhere else in the capitalist world, because there was relentless exploitation of one human being by the other people. Were just basically, it was completely void of spirituality. It was just exploitation, hard work, poverty. Some people were extremely rich. Other people, absolute majority, were desperately poor. People were, dying of hunger. In other words, they were describing probably early capitalism circa early 19th century, like Dickinson, pre-Dickens kind of, even worse than that. But we didn't question that because that's the picture of the world that we were presented with, and there was no alternative one. So we felt and it was childhood, and we lived in it was, in hindsight, it was strikingly similar, of course, to Nazi Germany, childhood. But we had no idea, obviously. Being a child means being naturally predisposed towards happiness. And so, yeah, we didn't ask those questions, because why? We played soccer. We did all kinds of things that kids do. We had portraits of Lenin staring at us from everywhere, and slogans, just huge red cloth, just strung across large streets and on every building, completely meaningless to the point that we didn't even notice them, but they needed to be there. It was like quotations from Bible. Parties solemnly swear, something like that, or people and the party are one whole, or Lenin is more alive than all of us, something like that. There were maybe several dozen different variations of these kind of slogans that were everywhere, and they were but you didn't notice them any more that you notice, I don't know, just you walk down the street, you don't, unless it's an interesting historical building, you're not looking at that building, you're just walking past it.